I want to welcome everybody for joining us today for an event that we are calling From Sea and Air to Tech, Lessons Learned from Military Veterans at SmartBear. SmartBear is the company that I work for that's putting on this event, as well as our panelists today. And so what we wanted to do was present something around Veterans Day, which is, of course, tomorrow, November 11th, and something that we could put out to the veteran community for those who are either looking to transition into a new industry, or maybe those who are looking to transition, out of the military for the first time, and looking for, any advice or tips, some stories from some others who have served in the military who made that transition themselves. So we have two people here with us today. Those people are Crystal Farley and Phil Vulgaris. Crystal and Phil, thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sure. So we'll just kind of dive right in. Just kind of ask, just to start off with, just shared your names already, but maybe Crystal, if you want to start off and share what branch you served in, where you were stationed, your role there, anything like that.
Yeah, you got it. I actually started out a little bit later in life in the military. And so I was a reservist. So I had a full-time job and a part-time job, and then eventually became a mom and all that good stuff. But I served, I joined in 2009 and I separated 2 years ago. So in 2018, I was actually stationed at Westover Air Reserve Base as an Air Force reservist. I was a 2T2, which is it's called air transportation. It's kind of like a logistics job. And I usually tell people when you go to the airport and there's people at the counter and they check you in for your flight and then they bring your bags to the plane or build baggage pallets. That's like the gist of the job. There's a lot more to it, but that's kind of a good comparison, if you will.
Yeah, I'll take it off from here. So I joined the military out of high school through service academy. So I went to the Naval Academy for my undergrad, and going to a service academy, you have a 5-year commitment upon graduation. So I served as an officer in the Navy for 6 years. Served in Yokosuka, Japan on a frigate, then went to Norfolk, Virginia on a aircraft carrier, and then was stationed, actually did a joint tour with the Coast Guard out of Alameda, California, which is in the Bay Area. Actually, interesting little tidbit about that job. I think the last 4 or 5 Navy officers that ended up being stationed there ended up transitioning to the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard's onto something. It seems to be a really good branch. People seem to like the Coast Guard a lot. But I decided to transition out. And so I guess here I am to tell that tale.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. So before we start talking about your transition and once you joined the tech industry in particular, what initially attracted you to the military? Phil, you want to start?
Yeah. For me, it wasn't on my radar at all until probably like late junior, early senior year of high school. I was actually a pretty highly recruited athlete. I played tennis in college, and I was getting recruited by a bunch of schools, and I got a recruitment letter from the Naval Academy. And I remember throwing it out, and I remember my mom fishing it out of the trash can and saying, "No, this is a good school. You should look into this." So I'm like, all right, whatever, Mom. And I did, and the coach invited me out for a recruiting trip, and it just seemed like a really good fit for me. I think at that point, my goals were, just to go to a really good school, play D1 tennis, and then I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So being an officer in the Navy seemed like as good an opportunity as any. And the opportunity to kind of travel around the world. Again, my first tour was out in Japan. I actually studied Japanese at the Naval Academy. So all those kind of international travel things were appealing to me, and being able to, at 21, be able to sort of be in a leadership position was really exciting for me as well. There's not many folks who graduate from school and at 21 are trying to lead, a group of sailors, 15, 20, whatever it was at the time. So yeah, that was kind of all appealing to me. That's how it kind of came together for me.
Wow, those are all very, very great reasons to make that decision. How about for you, Crystal?
Well, now I feel like Phil should have gone first when it came to introductions because I was just purely an enlisted folk. I was as a staff sergeant when I separated. But so like I said, I joined later in life. I actually joined the Air Force Reserve at the age of 27. So I was sort of the old lady when when I went through basic training. I think most of the kids were like 18 years old. And it was like their first time away from home and that sort of thing. But I joined because um, when I grew up, I faced a lot of adversity, if you will. And so straight out of high school, I actually worked. So I didn't go to college until also later in life, thanks to the military. But so I worked 3 jobs, and then my grandmother, who was the person that essentially raised me as a kid, she started to develop Alzheimer's. And that's really sad. I'm sure people watching, it's heart wrenching when your family members don't remember who you are or where you are. But she did remember like her entire life as a Navy nurse in World War II.
Wow.
So she could tell me her friends' names, how the soldiers, when they were injured, they would fly into her hospital into Chicago. And I literally was like, I want that. Like when I'm old and I can't remember anything, I want the friends and family that she had, because I didn't have that growing up. And, why not? So after evaluating the different branches, I selected the Air Force Reserve because they were the most family friendly, at least from that perspective, and at that point in my life. Yeah, and so I chose a job that had a bonus, which meant it was also highly deployable, and I decided to go for it. So, yeah, that's why I joined. But to Phil's point, like I I always wished that when I was in high school, like looking back on it, that recruiters came to my school, because they didn't. Like recruiters didn't come to my high school. And I probably would have taken the path of military because I felt like I had nowhere else to go. I felt like I had to work 3 jobs to survive and, not get an education right away. And so, I was, obviously I love the way that my life has turned out, but I think that there's way more opportunity out there than we realize even at a young age. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the same thing with my high school too. I mean, there was no really active military recruiting, so it just wasn't on my radar at all, unless it wasn't, really for just my tennis endeavors. I never would have joined, to be honest. But it's interesting to hear your sort of grandma's story, because it resonates with me. I mean, the friends, the people I've met in the military, like they stick with me. They're friends for life. I mean, you really go through some amazing times together. So yeah, that I hope later on in life I can look back to and think through those times, because it's pretty incredible journey
Yeah,
to
I'm
go
sure you
through
will.
it.
And I mean, think about it. Like, even if you think about like the tours that you've done, I served one tour in Afghanistan. I went to Bagram, and like, even though I'm separated, I'm still like family with people from my unit that
Yeah.
have since retired. Several have passed away, and we all still come together like a family. And those relationships, they won't go away. We
Yeah.
won't forget them. Yeah.
That's what's great. I mean, you kind of already answered a little, to some degree, the next question I was going to ask, which was what's something that you accomplished during your time in the service that you were really proud of? And like I said, you've both already listed certainly things that are very worth being proud about. You mentioned being, 21 and no other jobs offering you that kind of opportunity. I mean, at 21, I either was delivering pizza or worked at a used record store. I don't remember which one. I did both around that age. I just don't remember what I was doing at
Nice.
21. It's nothing that I can, hang my hat on. I'm not still friends with those people from the pizza restaurant or the used record store. I had no idea where those people are. So is there anything else that either of you kind of still look fondly back on and just feel a real sense of pride for what you did during that time?
For me, I've actually already said this when people ask me these questions. Like the thing I'm most proud of, it actually doesn't like show up on my resume at all. So when I was an intel officer on my first ship, I had about 10 people I was responsible for as a division officer, and 2 of those folks are now officers in the Navy. And I walked them through like the process to apply for colleges. For the process, I wrote the letters of recommendation, and to see them succeed. One's a helo pilot, the other's an intel officer now. Um, I always like to think like, yeah, I left, but I think I replaced myself with 2 really great officers. So I think the Navy got a good deal out of me. Um, that's something that I think I'm really proud of. Just like helping set those guys up for success, taking the time to get them to where they want to go in their careers is something that I look back on pretty fondly.
That's awesome. I think you're right. I think it's the indirect way that we impact other people. But the other thing with that, so, the military offers you opportunities to be things like a victim advocate. So, like, if you're deployed and people are in uncomfortable situations, you can be a resource for them. You can learn how to, present and facilitate trainings for your unit or your wing. You can develop certain specialties, and there's like things that you're introduced to that you might not have realized. And I think the other thing too is it was a little humbling for me. Like, basic training was fun. I liked basic training. I think most people end up by reflecting back on it like, oh, it was fun. Like, it was a good experience. You're scared going into it, but I think at the same time, like, got through that, and I was pretty successful in basic training. But when it came to military life, I actually struggled a lot. I was not really great at remote testing. So when you're in the reserves, you're working your full-time job and you're expected to complete all of the same requirements as an active duty personnel. And so I was still expected to maintain certain credentials, take certain tests, and be available and ready when they needed me, right? And so I was not good at remote study. Like, I don't know how kids are doing it today. I was not great at it. I actually failed my staff sergeant test twice and had to take the school in residence. And then I excelled because I just realized that that's how I learned better, right? So I learned a lot about myself in that way. And so I think it sort of could give people hope in that if you feel like you've not been great at school or you've not been great at whatever career you're in, there are other options that will give you some really great life experiences that translate into your everyday. And so I think that's something that I'm pretty proud of, that I got through that without giving up.
Great. So you both, like I said, mentioned multiple things, certainly worthy of being proud of. But there still came a time when you were ready to transition out of the military, and that's one of the things as I've been kind of getting ready for this event that I've learned is kind of a daunting move. It's a huge change. The life inside and outside of the military are, I'm sure there are plenty of similarities, but there's some very obvious differences. So when you started to look into that, maybe being time for that transition, what excited you about that, and what was maybe a little daunting where you knew it was a big decision and not one to take lightly?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think whether you're an officer enlisted, I think the 5 to 6 year mark is sort of this really interesting time to transition out, because at that point, maybe you re-up for another 3 or 4 years is usually the standard length of time. And I know for my career path, it would have been, probably 3 more years as a department head on a ship. And then they dangle a nice little shore duty after that. So maybe you get like a cool, like cushy job at the Pentagon for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden look back and you're like, wow, I'm already at 12 years. Well, what's another 8 at that point? They get the
Right.
20 in retirement. So for me, it was really like, well, it's either now or never, I felt like, looking at that time. And a couple things also fed into this. So at that point, this is like 2010. So the post 9/11 GI Bill was pretty new. And having gone to a service academy, this idea of going back to school and like an actual like normal school, not a service academy, was pretty appealing to me. So I took advantage of that. I took advantage of the 9/11 GI Bill, applied to business schools, ended up going to Notre Dame for 2 years. So that and using that as a transition vehicle to sort of the private sector made a lot of sense for me. And I think for a lot of military folks out there, again, enlisted officer, like the post 9/11 GI Bill is a great opportunity. A lot of schools are part of the Yellow Ribbon program, which matches the contributions or pays like will cover the rest of the tuition. And again, I think I was one of the first group of people that sort of took advantage of it. And it's a great program. And I think, getting education is a great stepping stone for the private sector. I also think one of my biggest advice for military when it comes trying to, use the education route is do not sell yourself short. I mean, there's a lot of predatory for-profit schools out there that look at that GI Bill and look at dollar signs. You're a veteran, you've got some really interesting, unique experiences that a lot of great schools would love to have you. So, from the University of California system offers a ton of benefits. Any state public school, I mean, they're all great schools, go down the list, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, whatever it may be. do not sell yourself short on your education, because you're in a really unique position. Any great, state, private school, there's an opportunity for you. I don't think veterans realize that. So, I mean, if you looked at my GPA, there's no reason I should have gone to Notre Dame. But I think because, I was, a veteran and brought some other things to the table, I was able to get in. So.
Yeah, Phil, good for you. I definitely didn't go to Notre Dame, but I'm with you in that, in the education piece. I think that's something that I didn't even really know about. We talked about this in preparation, right? Like we're given a lot of benefits as veterans or as military personnel, and it's like hard to navigate all of the benefits that we have. And I transitioned out because I was approaching my 7-year mark, and I was going to reenlist. And like you, it was either a 4 or 6 year commitment for my job, and I would have wanted to deploy again, and then at that point I would have just stayed in for the 20. And like life happens, I deployed my first time when my daughter was 1. I would have deployed my second time when she could actually talk to me and tell me she missed me. And my husband was not thrilled with the idea of me going away to Iraq or Afghanistan for 6 months again. And so, I made a decision, and part of me regrets it sometimes. Sometimes I miss it, and I miss my friends. And when things happen to my unit, I feel like I should be there, but I think overall it was the best decision for my life. But like I said, I didn't go to college right out of high school. I went later in life, and the Air Force Reserve, and specifically, or even the Air Force in general, and I don't know about the other branches, but I earned my associate's degree with the Air Force. So I earned an associate's degree through the community college of the Air Force. I was able to take a public speaking course that was fully covered while I was deployed and covered by tuition assistance. I was then able to transfer, and I got caught by one of those for-profit schools at first, but then got smart about it and actually transferred to a local college here in New Hampshire, where they actually took my military experience as credits. So they were able to transition my experience into credits, and then transferred over my credits from my other school that I had gone to. And so I didn't even have to go to school that long, and I was able to get a degree fairly quickly. So, and it was something that I really enjoyed and liked. So I think that when you're faced with decisions like that, like Phil said, don't sell yourself short. A degree for me was really important to get, especially like to be a good role model for myself and my daughter. So we got to take advantage of that when we can.
Totally. And I mean, I know we'll get into it, but the education route is one route. There are other routes too that we can talk about. Yeah. But yeah, it can be overwhelming, but it's important to kind of find the signal through the noise, and don't sell yourself short when it comes to those opportunities.
So we've got 2 different paths here, 2 different branches of the service, and two different paths that we're taking here. So as you look towards education, or whether you already completed your education and you started looking for employment elsewhere, where did you seek out help with that? And were there other sources of information, whether people who came out before you, or books or websites or guidance counselors, whoever it was? Where were some of those places that you started to look for some either guidance or just some inspiration of, oh, I could do it this way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, again, so it's, we're going sort of this education route here, but every school, again, especially like very reputable ones and state's public schools, have veterans groups within them. So tap into those for sure. I don't know, every school I applied to had some type of veteran group for all the alumni, people who are attending there, and they're a great resource for me. Figure out what the community is like there, what opportunities are, so on and so forth. So that was one, so that was a really good thing for me. I think there's a part 2 of your question, which was like, how did I then get into tech a bit? It was interesting for me. I knew I wanted to get into marketing, and I actually started thinking about marketing around consumer packaged goods, so like brand management. So think of like Tide, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. I actually had an internship at Johnson & Johnson between my first and second year of business school. And I was on their hemorrhoid cream brand. And I realized right then and there that world was not for me. It must be something about that particular brand, maybe, who knows? You got to start somewhere, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, I walked out of that internship thinking like, wow, you know what? I kind of got to go back to the drawing board a bit. I don't know really what I want to do. So I actually started looking at more of these leadership development programs. A ton of companies out there have these development programs, and I joined with AT&T has a leadership development program. But I know like Amazon has a veterans program, which you don't actually need like a degree for. Oracle has and so for me, my entry into tech was really like utilizing these development programs at some bigger tech companies as a starting point. And a good thing about some of these programs, and again, like the one from AT&T as an example, is like, anything you want to do in marketing, you can do at that company. It's so big that like, you look at my marketing background there, I did B2B product marketing. I did, cable TV marketing. I marketed things, Internet of Things. It's a lot of different experiences, and that was a really good path for me to, get more exposure, figure out what exactly I wanted to do, and then use that as a stepping stone to join a company like SmartBear, which much smaller in scale, 600 people, but that valued not just my military experience, but that experience at like the bigger tech company, the larger company, and bring some of those learnings to the smaller firm. So that was kind of a bit of my path and how I got into tech. Yeah.
Sure. And Crystal?
It was a little bit windy. I guess I want to like first say, when times are tough, like I remember I lost my job. I was laid off in 2009 from Samsonite. I was a regional manager for them, and they filed bankruptcy. I got laid off, and it was actually like leaving my physical for the Air Force Reserve that day. And so I remember that really clearly. And I was like, I got laid off. Let me go to basic training. Let me go to tech school. Let me get through all of that. And then when I got back, I decided to work for Apple. Apple was where I started my tech career, but I was working in a store. I was like, I'm just going to do this thing. I love Apple products. Like, let me just do this. And, within a year, I was actually a manager. So I'd like gone through the steps because I couldn't just stay in that role. But I think that to the first point of, when times are hard and like we lose jobs or life changes drastically, there are a lot of options outside of what you're doing today. And I think like, even when it comes to military jobs, like even if you like hospitality, there are jobs in the military for hospitality. So if you wanted to do something like the reserves now or take a different path now, even later in your life, there are options there too. Even from the tech side, when I was thinking about either transitioning out or transitioning to a different role, because you can move jobs within the military as well. I thought about Intel as one because I'm really into technology, and it was sort of cybersecurity was sort of a new job for the Air Force at that time. So I thought about that. But instead, I just took my civilian career that way and stayed doing what I wanted to do in the military. And then I eventually ended up by getting recruited into IBM's and HPE after that. And that's the more, I think, the more powerful story. So I think that my military experience has helped me in tech because I'm a woman in tech, and it allows me to have the experience to deal with men in great numbers, and in a way that I'm able to sort of craft my whatever I need to say to my audience. But I think also with that, I worked for companies like IBM. That are super hierarchical, and you have to know how to navigate the politics of different managers and bosses, or if you're selling, I was in sales, you're talking to people in C-suite, and you need to be able to stroke egos and have great conversations when you're making yourself credible and respected and trusted advisor. But when I moved into HPE, I was actually recruited by a veteran recruiter. So I often will tell people to like search LinkedIn for veteran recruiters and reach out.
Great idea.
Because he was really able to show me how my experience at this point, I had gotten my degree in social sciences. So I love people, I love human behavior, right? But I was also a victim advocate. I was a facilitator with the Air Force Reserve. I was in sales and business analytics software that gave me a whole nother set of competencies. Phil will probably agree that his top competency is composure, because like I'm not super stressed out by a ton of things, right? So I'm pretty even keel with pressure. And so he was able to really showcase all of these different check boxes I had and how they actually fit with an enablement role, which is where I am today. And I was like, oh my God, I'm actually perfect for this. Like I never really thought I could do it, but I do check all of these boxes. And it was life-changing for me. I absolutely love being in enablement. It is where I belong in some capacity, probably for the rest of my life. You know, and I was able to work for a company like HPE and then move to a company like SmartBear, where I was able to build something from the ground up. There was no program before. So it really has tested my knowledge and my limits over the last year, which has been pretty powerful. So it goes back to not selling yourself short, for sure.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, your sort of first foray into tech was through the retail
Yeah.
environment. Because like, we talk about, oh, transition to tech. It's like, you don't need to know how to code. You don't need to be a developer. There are so many jobs out there. And, one thing I'd failed to mention in my own sort of AT&T leadership experience was the first role that I had there, they put you on the front line. So I was actually a cable guy manager for like 10 months
Perfect.
in Texas, right? So, I mean, that's where I started in my journey in tech. So it's not just about like the coding jobs and the software jobs. There's a whole ecosystem around tech that you can, potentially gain entryway. And then from there, again, you should be able to pivot, right? Pivot from retail to sales enablement, from managing cable guys to now product marketing. There are pathways for you to do that. Just got to be flexible and open. So.
Yeah, tech is this, super competitive industry, but it's not that it's a difficult industry as opposed to like compared to retail or like you said, any other kind of job. I mean, I used to write for everything but tech, and the first time I ever applied for a job in tech, the response was, "But you've never written about tech before," and it was like, okay. I mean, it's just another subject. It's another. You can market within hospitality, within retail, within tech. There's so much. So yeah, the whole not selling yourself short thing is a great kind of one theme for this. And then Crystal, your point about composure, it's totally true. I mean, I try to remember that myself because I do get panicked and stressed quickly. And it helps me to see other people on the project not doing that, because I then look at them and go, okay, this is either not a big deal or someone's gone through this before and survived it, or that's just a trait that like I want to have. So it's not that someone can really go back and get your same military experience, but they can still be inspired or motivated by your level of composure and try to kind of learn how to maintain that themselves. So two great points. So we talked about, or on the questions that we have here, we talked about maybe talking about how you've used your military background during the interview process, but I'd love to kind of get straight into like just in your jobs, as a whole, like where are some opportunities, whether it's through your composure or your organization or whatever it is, that your military background is definitely helping you with something in your day-to-day job, where someone who was looking to do the same could think, oh wow, I have that background, I would be able to use that skill set as well.
Phil, do you want me to jump in? Because you inspired me with something.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please have at it.
So because you said that, with your AT&T career, you started as a cable guy or on the front lines, right?
Yeah.
That's how you said it. And for me, I started out as a specialist in an Apple store, right? And I think that the military translated very well for that experience, because there was really great pride in achieving the next level of everything, right? So when I went from specialist to expert, there's a long career path if you want to work at Apple. So it might be just retail to people, but it's one of the hardest jobs I've ever had in a great way. But it was like the next ribbon on my, on my chest. It was like, okay, I've like checked that box. Now I can do this thing. And so I think that the perseverance and the grit to get to have the experiences to do well every single day is really important. I think that my ability to make sound decisions in short periods of time is something that has allowed me to excel. It's not, I always say it's not always the best decision, but it's the right decision for that moment. And to know that, it's mistakes happen, and as long as you can recover and rebound, it's okay. I think that I've been able to give myself that grace, but I stick with time management and composure are my top two competencies, so I can get a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time and not be too stressed out about it.
Nice. Yeah. For me again, so as a marketer, I kind of pride myself on being a storyteller, and when I go into interviews and I talk about my military background, I think actually, well, I almost want to back up a bit, because one thing I will say, and I think we'll get into it maybe a little later, but it's to build upon that. When anyone in the military knows that, like, whether you've been in there for 4 or 5 years, 20 years, you have so many different jobs. it's really difficult for someone on the HR side to sort of distill like what's important, what isn't. So for me, like when I talk about my military background, I really only talk through maybe one or two things. I talk about my time as an intel officer, which was really only maybe like 2 or 3 years. Um, and I draw the bridge from that experience to marketing. So like as an intel officer, you're essentially a storyteller, right? You're taking information from a lot of different sources, you're synthesizing it, you're trying to figure out, well, what's the story here? And your job is to relay that story to like your commanding officer so they make better decisions. What does a marketer do? As a marketer, you take information from a lot of different sources, you synthesize it, and you figure out, okay, what's the story here around my product? And then you tell that story to decision makers. In this case, it's consumers who are trying to buy that product. So like, to me, the storytelling aspect is something that I really like trying to think through. Like I got a lot of storytelling experience as an intel officer, and I try to bring that to my marketing. But like, it's kind of up to me to make that connection when I'm talking to someone from HR. They're not going to make it themselves. So you need to draw those dots together and really think through like, what is that one or two thing from your experience that's really going to resonate with that, one or two things in that new job you're looking at in tech. And you need to connect those dots for them. So for me, that storytelling, that ability to just take a lot of information and synthesize it into like one or two bullet points so someone can understand what's going on. That's a skill set that I use every day in my marketing job. And then as a product marketer, I think what got me into product marketing is that in many ways, as a product marketer, you're sort of like the QB for a lot of different groups. Like you're trying to bring product into the mix, trying to bring sales into the mix. So I think that takes a lot of just leadership qualities, and being an officer is sort of a profession of leadership. And so that's what kind of, when thinking about marketing, product marketing is sort of what resonated with me, because I think it sort of flexes those sort of leadership management skill sets that you definitely get as an officer in the Navy.
That's
Yeah.
a really great point, actually, Phil. And even on the enlisted side, I was a senior airman, which is it's not an officer of any sort. And I was leading, because I was older, right, than my peers. I was able to be what's called a counter supervisor when I was deployed. So I actually led the passenger terminal when I was deployed, because of my age and my life experiences. But then ended up by getting promoted, and as a non-commissioned officer, you still gain a lot of those same skill sets. And Noel, to your point, like tech people always think like you need to be a software engineer, you need to code, there's all of these other facets of tech, and I try to educate even local people in New Hampshire about that. But in sales enablement, you're a collaborator, you're getting information from all different places, and you're trying to disseminate it in a way that people can understand it or articulate it for you. So, I think that as I actually ended my career with the Air Force as a load planner. So my job, like you, Phil, there's like 8 different functions of what my job MOS is. And I was a load planner. So it was really important for me to capture information, to get accurate information, for safety of flight. Like people's lives were at risk if I didn't do my job properly. But I was getting information from different branches, from different parts of the aerial port. I had to get that information and communicate it to the crew. So, I think you're right in that, really just looking at your everyday job function. What did you do, and how does that apply when you look at the job description of a new job that you're trying to apply for, and like literally aligning it would probably be a great exercise.
Yep, totally.
I've got one last question. It's kind of a two-parter, and again, y'all been so fantastic on this that you've kind of already covered a little bit, but maybe just to kind of summarize some of the points that you've made. I was going to get both of you to kind of share your advice for other veterans who are looking to transition into, I think we should just say, the workforce, not just tech. I mean, it could certainly apply to tech, because like we've said, tech is just part of the workforce. It's not a kind of specialized thing. But what kind of advice would you have for people who are looking to make that switch, whether it's advice ahead of an interview process or even once they get the job that they're going after, how to turn that into a successful career?
Yeah, so for me, I think there's sort of two pieces of advice. One I think is strategic, one's more tactical. So strategic wise, I kind of referenced what we were just talking about, right? This idea of being able to really have a nice story arc between one or two things you did in the military and how that relates to, that particular job you're applying for. Being a military vet and applying for certain jobs may get you in the door. It might, there's no guarantee, but it might, and it certainly helps. But once you're in front of that, interviewer, that HR person who maybe doesn't really know too much about, what your experience is, you really need to be able to distill it. And so, just drawing that story arc, again, I use my own example, being an intel officer, being a storyteller, being a marketer, being a storyteller. I don't talk about some of the other aspects because I don't need to. I just want to know like the one or two things in your military experience that resonates with this current job you're applying for. So don't go through the laundry list of things. So that's sort of think at a high level, making sure you've got that story down. I think tactically, I'm a big proponent on a couple things on your resume. One, you got to demilitarize it. Get rid of all the jargon. When it comes to, again, this idea of you have so many different jobs, cut the fat. Don't be afraid to just highlight like the 2 or 3, maybe even the one that will resonate with the job you're applying for. Because people can get lost in your resumes. So, just cut the fat, trim it, highlight the 2 or 3 jobs, get rid of all the jargon. To the extent of, I would even go so far as tweaking some of the job titles. So for example, my last job was a maritime homeland defense officer. And I think your standard HR person would be like, well, what the heck does that mean? On my resume, when I'm applying for a tech job, I call it a strategic planning officer. That probably resonates more with someone. You think about, oh, okay, strategy planning, I get it. Maritime homeland defense officer, I don't know what that means. So be strategic, be tactful, tweak things as appropriate so you can tell the story that you need to tell. Yeah, so those are some of the sort of high level things and sort of strategic, tactical things I would encourage people to do.
Yeah, and you know what? To that point, Phil, use your resources, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
even I would say, like, as a veteran, you are entitled to free services all over the place. So, Military One Source is a great website. You can get you can get help with resume writing, interviewing skills. There are, for female veterans, feel free to reach out to your Center for Women in Enterprise because maybe you want to start your own business. Maybe you really liked what you did in the military and you want to do something civilian now like that. There's a ton of grants, a ton of money, and a ton of resources for you to get all of the information you need. If you are a reservist veteran, you can go to the VA and there are actually reserve officers there, veteran resource officers that can help you guide your path. I think people oftentimes will like hear VA and they like roll their eyes or whatever. We're entitled to free medical care. We can be covered for X number of years based upon deployments. There are people sitting there waiting to help you. And so while it might take time, you might be missing out on some benefits that would be really, really important in helping you transition into the workforce. So I would definitely not be scared to wait a little bit or reach out via email to those resources as well.
Those are both great. I want to thank you both for your time today, as well as for your service for this country. Thank you so much. You both had great stories to share here, and kind of recap what you both just said. I mean, I love the idea of making that resume, stand out and be recognizable, no matter how different it might seem like your experience and background was. I mean, that's good advice to do, even if you've worked in tech the entire time. You still, customize your experiences and your resume to exactly what it is that company is looking for, and there's lots of ways to tell that story in a way that is very relatable, in any field you may be looking to go into. And then, Crystal, your point as well about using the resources that are available to you. It's great that those are out there for veterans, especially, and for women veterans as well. That's about all that we had today. Did either of you have any other points that you wanted to cover, or are we good?
I want to say one more thing.
Oh, yeah,
sure.
I think that sometimes veterans or military personnel kind of downplay their experience because they don't have the civilian experience. And I want to say own it, because there are so many good qualities that you learn in the military, regardless of job, that will benefit any company. And most companies actually know that. So instead of assuming that somebody might not hire you because you were in the military, take some of this advice, like Phil said, and tweak your resume, because you probably fit in mostly anywhere. It's just talking about it the right way.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. This is something that we plan on sharing, widely, as it's advice that's going to be helpful for anyone looking to make a transition into the workforce. I want to thank everyone for being here, for let me say what we called this again, for From Sea and Air to Tech, Lessons Learned from Military Veterans at SmartBear. Thank you so much, Phil and Crystal.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
All right.